I'm going to talk about making a rig, three bird rig for what I do for the World Championships. So I'll talk about each one a little bit and kind of process of them, and then I'll just open it up to questions. So as you can see, I got two different styles of rig here. First of all, the rig, the carver gets to choose what they want to make. So you're not set to a certain species. You can make what you want. And you need to have a pair, a drake, a hen, and the third bird can be anything, another hen, another drake, or in this case, drake, hen, canvasback with a swan. But it's something you're going to want to do, something that's going to be seen. So like a pair of redheads, you can do a canvasback or canvasbacks with a swan. Something that they're going to mix naturally. So you wouldn't want to do an American bird with a bird from another part of the country that you probably wouldn't see together. So, so this is kind of, the swan's kind of a confidence bird. So it's a bird that will be out on the water and canvasbacks are drawn to it, or vice versa. A swan flying over would see canvasbacks on the water, and they would come in. They like eating the same things, so they're kind of drawn to each other. So that was kind of the idea behind this rig. Traditionally, when the rigs I've made have been generally, like this is the only time I've ever done something like this, but generally I've always done 2 drakes, a hen, or 2 hens and a drake, the same species. So the redheads was my rig from 2016, and chose to make 2 drakes and a hen, and then I always try to do something different with the other bird. So in this case, I decided to do one that's kind of preening, a little jazzed up a little bit, and then just some more, and the other pair is just a kind of a traditional, simple pattern that kind of captures the essence of the species. So they're carved out of Tupelo and painted with acrylics. They're hollow. The bodies are hollow on these. So what I do when I cut them out, I cut off the bottom about an inch or so off the bottom. So then I screw them together and I carve the body, carve the head separate. And when I'm done carving them, roughing them out, I'll pull them apart and hollow out the bird.
You save a piece so that you can, so it's square when you cut it out, and then you save that outside piece. Is that how you cut it off in the bandsaw? You don't carve it first and run it through.
No, when it's in block form, I'll cut the bottom off. I'll just draw a line about 3/4 of an inch to an inch up.
Okay, on the block form,
And the
before
block
you cut
form,
it.
yep, and then I'll run it through.
I got you.
And then after I'm done cutting it out, then when I go back to make that final cut across the top, I end up with the top part of it and then the bottom board.
Yeah.
And I just got to complete that cut and then fit it together.
Is your glue joint above the water line?
Generally, yep. And then when I'm done carving the body, I'll take it apart and hollow it out. So these decoys here, all of them but the swan, when I'm done hollowing them out, they weigh about 1 pound. So they're pretty light. And these 5, I did not hollow out the heads. So when I'm developing my patterns, when they're judged in competition, they're floated out in the bay off the ocean. So some years you'll end up with nice calm water, usually not so much, but most years it's fairly rough. And so the challenge, part of the challenge in the competition is getting them to float. Well, I started competing in this rig competition in the early 2000s, and it took me several years just to figure out how to float birds. I was terrible at it. Like my first rig, I didn't even hollow out. So they were heavier birds, and you get that rough water. One year I made 3 can of geese. A lot of work in a can of geese. And I got a little swimming pool that test floated before I went out there when I keeled them. And they have to self-right, so they put them in the water upside down. The geese they put from the side, but they had to self-right. Well, my geese were very light, and I put a keel on about the size of the one that's on the Swan, and put them in the kiddie pool, and boom, they self-righted with no problem, floated pretty decent. But I took them out to the show, really rough, windy, and my geese ended up with concussions. You saw the bottoms more than you saw the tops. The heads were feeding on the water. I didn't have enough weight in my keels. So I learned a lesson. But it took many years to finally get down to where flotation I can get pretty good. One other thing that helps with flotation is making a wider bird. And then if you look at the front profile, let's say, you can see that it's not rounded very much on the sides. And even on the front, it's not rounded fully around. So, which keeps it more stable. It's just that more stable that way.
Hey, Tom.
Yep.
So years ago, I tried to make sort of what I call a fat body bluebill.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I had more trouble because of it being wide. If it was upside down, it was happy to stay that. It was harder because of the wide body.
Yep.
Is there a trick to getting the wide bodies to self-right?
You want to make sure the top end is round. So it's possible that
Maybe I didn't hollow it out enough.
So if it's hollow, and you want to make sure your top part is round.
Yeah.
If you end up with a kind of a squared body bird, and then the other key is to having the lead in the keel. So these are pretty heavy. Like I told you, the birds weigh about 1 pound, but if you're to hold this, it probably weighs closer to 3 or 4 pounds. I've got that much lead in here, into the keel. When I make my keels, I put the center line in my keel, and I bore it out the same distance from the front to the back. Maybe in this case, maybe like a 5-inch long bore, and I drill that down on my drill press with the Forstner bit, so it's probably about a 1/4 inch from the bottom of the keel. And then when I'm ready to, I guess, back up one minute here. I'll continue with that. But once I'm ready to float these in the water and get them to float the way I want them, I take lead shot. I pour that in there. Make sure your keel's sealed. Pour that in there, tape it off, screw it onto the bottom of the decoy. And at this point, it's all painted. The bottom is sealed. I'll put it in the water in either a tub or something, self-rights, and then I want it to float to the right depth. So with the lead shot, the nice thing about that is I can add or take away, so I can adjust the height of it is going into the water. Now going back a step, when I'm back to the carving part of it, I've carved it, hollowed it, and then I take some saran wrap it, put it in it, before I glue it up, I put it in a tank of water. And I put some tape on the side, mark it, it doesn't have to be any science. I just take a 3/4 inch piece of hardwood, and on the tape I just marked it on the sides, the front, the back, both sides, and I place it in the water. And then just to see if it's floating the way I want them to float in the water, like they're sitting on a table. So I don't want them like this or like this or like this. So I have to place them in there wrapped in that saran wrap to keep them from getting wet and sucking in water. And I'll go over that issue I had with the Swan later. But But that way I can get it in the water. And if I need to make an adjustment then, say it's not floating quite right, it's listing to one side or the other because maybe the head is turned, or a bird like this, you got a lot more mass on one side than you do the other, and then you got the head doing this, so this becomes more challenging to get floated. So either A, I need to take out more wood, or B, I've taken out as much wood as I can. I can't take out any more without going through. I'll take some lead, like lead straps, place them in where I need to, tape them down, get them back together, wrap them, saran wrap, put them in the water, and then if the water line ends up being, you know, close to my lines, front and back and on the sides, and where I need to be, then I know when I screw on this keel, fill it with lead, it's all centered, it's going to pull it straight down. So I'm not having to add lead in the front because it's too heavy in the back. So that way when it floats, everything's centered. So when it's out in some rough water, it's gonna ride more. Correct. Yep.
As you're planning your birds, do you avoid some patterns or some poses that a bird would do? For instance, a bird that's leaning or stretching out its head that looks really cool. My experience has been really hard to keep it from bobbling back and forth.
They're more challenging. Yeah, the higher head birds, and like you said, forward head, are more challenging to get to float and look more natural on the water. In that instance, I would probably hollow the head, just to keep more of the weight to the body.
Did you ever consider doing a demonstration of hollowing the head? That
Sure.
escapes me how that would be done.
Yep. So I actually did it on the swan.
I heard about that.
So that's kind of how I go about getting things ready for flotation. And then carving, once I have them hollowed, I'll seal the insides, and I'll use some West System epoxy glue to glue them up. And one big challenge on the swan, well, I have many challenges with the swan. Number one, it's the biggest bird I've ever carved, so finding a big block of wood. The body's one block, the neck is another, and then the head is another. So the reason I did that is because the grain runs vertically, so it's the strongest, and then I have the head running that way, so horizontal, so it's the strong part of the wood. So, so finding a block of wood was a challenge. When I got my block of wood, it weighed a ton. So the UPS guy comes walking in, had it delivered to my office. He comes walking in, just looked like he's carrying a tree. It's like, what's his problem? It's Tupelo. It can't be that heavy. And he walked out, and I went and grabbed it, picked it up. I was like, oh my gosh. I didn't know Tupelo could be this heavy. It weighed over 100 pounds, a block of wood. It was 55 inches long, 18 inches wide, and about 10 inches thick. And my next thought after I got a hernia was, how is this going to carve? Is this going to be miserable? It's so heavy and this and that. So it's like, I'm going for it. I'm all in. So I got it home, and I had to cut it to length. This is a little over, about 30 inches long, the body. So this big block of wood, I had nothing to cut it. So I took a circular saw and cut as much as I could, as deep as I could. And then I'm there with a hand saw, doing the rest. My daughter did visit me, and I put her to work for less than 2 minutes. So she was done with that. So got it carved, and then, so the block weighed about 55 pounds when I got it down to what I needed. So after carving, I got it all carved, roughed out. I had a bottom board on there, which is kind of a rough cut on my bandsaw. So got it all carved and got ready to pre-float. So I I had to throw it in my bathtub. It's the only thing I've got big enough to put this piece in. So I wrapped it with saran wrap, well, trying to find saran wrap wide enough, so I ended up finding some plastic that they use for wrapping pallets, shrinking wrap pallets. So I used that to wrap up the bird, filled up the bathtub.
How about a trash bag?
Yeah, I wanted to be able to see.
Oh, where
see
the water line was?
A dry cleaner bag would probably work. Sure. Those clear ones. So I wanted to be able to see it. So I wrapped it up, got the bathtub full, put it in there, and it's like, it floated perfect. I didn't need to add anything or nothing. I was super excited. So I had to get my wife and kids, hey, come look at the swan in the tub. So it was in there longer than I normally like to keep birds in there. So I got it out and must have had a little pinhole in my saran wrap. So it took some moisture on the bottom. Ta-da. So I went downstairs and I sealed up the inside, bottom board, the body, and just let it dry for a few hours. We were going out for dinner for some birthdays that night, Sunday night, and I thought, well, we're leaving soon. I'm gonna go put another coat of sealer on the inside of that swan. I come into my shop and my bottom board looked like a soup bowl. I could eat ice cream, whatever, beautiful bowl, but it isn't what I wanted. So that moisture was enough to, so it's like, I'm done. It's not gonna, so it's like, I panicked. I had some oak boards laying around, some clamps. So I clamped it this way, top, bottom. And then I went to pick up my son at college before the dinner, and I said, hey son, we're gonna be late. I gotta stop at Home Depot. I need more boards, I need more clamps. And so I got home, added more boards, more clamps, so if anyone runs into that, give me a call, I know what to do. So I got home and clamped everything up, because it was still, you could tell it was still wet underneath there. So I thought, with any luck, it'll dry overnight and flatten out. So I left it overnight, went to work, came home that evening and unclamped it. By golly, it dried flat. It fit perfect. And so I avoided a big disaster, but that was probably my biggest challenge with this whole bird. But the neck is hollow, head is hollow, bill is hollow. What I did is cut out the head and cut it down the middle of the head. Same thing with the neck. The neck is cut down the center here. And so once I carved the head, carved the neck, got it to where I wanted to, I had it glued together with hot glue. Just a couple dabs, doesn't need much, otherwise you'll have a hard time getting it apart. But pulled it apart, hollowed it out, and then I doweled it with a 1-inch oak dowel from the head into the body here, or head into the neck, neck into the body. And so I left there's platforms in here with solid epoxy. And then I epoxy glued it together. And I think really with that, all that added strength with that joint being the way it is, because it's epoxy. So it's pretty solid.
How thick is the wall on that thing?
I would say about a 1/4 inch.
Wow.
Yeah. So that, like I said, when I started carving this swan, it weighed 55 pounds. After I was done carving it, hollowing it, it's down to 6 pounds. So there's not much wood left. It's pretty light. The keel weighs more than the swan. So. And then the canvasbacks, they're hollow bodies with solid heads. Now the tails, you can see in these three are dropped down. So when I float these, I had enough lead into the keels to get them to pull down into the water, so the tails are sitting right on the water. So any tail that you have dropped like this needs to be sitting on the water. So I just put enough lead in to get them to sink that much. So that's how much lead is in here to get these to pull down about 3/4 of an inch to an inch, just to pull them down. They're all painted with acrylics. The big challenge with the swan was through the carving. I carved, I'd say 90% of, well, all of these with hand tools. I do use power tools on the bills, the heads a little bit. Any detail work with feather carving groups, just cleaning up edges and things like that, I'll use power. But for the most part, I'll use hand tools. Even defining all these feathers here, I used like a party knife and a little knife to do all that work. And then painting was my biggest wonder. How am I going to hold this thing and paint it? It's big. So Facebook, Floyd Schultz, he carves big eagles and raptors. So he's dealing with this big stuff all the time. And I saw that he, in one of his pictures, he had a base made. So it was a piece of, I bought a 4-inch piece of oak, solid oak, made a post, then I made 4 legs that came off of it with some wheels on it. And then I took my power arm and screwed that into the top. And I had made a aluminum L channel that fit into my holes for my keels. And I could clamp that onto that power arm. And then I moved everything away, so if my swan, I could tip it this way, tip it that way. I wasn't going to be running into a cabinet or a floor or anything. So I cleared out a big area of my shop and was able to put that on there and loose it up, turn it at any angle, tighten it up, and it would just stay there. So I could paint on the back without having my hands all over it, worrying about hitting the head on anything. So that saved me a lot of time, and I think really helped to do a decent job painting. So any questions?
Is it a tundra swan or a?
Yep,
It is.
it's a tundra swan. Tundra swans are a little smaller than the trumpeter swans that you see here in Minnesota. A lot of the swans you see now and through the spring are trumpeter swans. They're bigger. The trumpeter swans are bigger. Some of the differences are the bill shape. The tundra swan has this little yellow patch in front of the eye. Another difference is the tundra swan, the area up here is round. The head going into the bill is round, whereas a trumpeter swan, it's more V-shaped. But trumpeter swans, they're a lot bigger. A lot bigger. So I think they're 5 inches longer. Thereabouts. Yep.
So, like when you're thinking about doing a rig like that, are you just basing it off of like, oh, I've seen the canvas backs with swans, or obviously 3 redheads would be together?
Yeah.
Or are you thinking, oh, this will get the judges on this one?
Yeah.
You know?
Actually, my rig of choice going into last year was I was going to do wood ducks.
Okay.
And then a good friend of mine had requested I make a pair of canvas backs for him
Okay.
one day when I ever had time. And he came to Game Fair last year and sat with us for the weekend, and I thought, this would be kind of fun to carve his canvas backs in front of him. So he was there Saturday and Sunday. And he, on Sunday, he said, these are turning out really nice. I think they should be part of a rig. I said, okay, sounds good. You want another hen or do you want a drake? He said, no, I don't want either. Would you make a tundra swan to go with them? So actually, it excited me because I've been making a lot of redheads, a lot of canvas backs, old squaws, and a lot of the same thing for a while. So I thought this would be something different, be something challenging. And So I got excited about it and got to it. And it was a lot of fun. And he's an avid hunter. He sees the tundras where he lives. He sees the tundras. He can. It's up in North Dakota. You can hunt tundras. You can get a permit to hunt tundras. So he sees the canvasbacks and the swans intermingling all the time. So
So they were sold, that's what the motivation was.
that, and I thought it was a fun idea.
Yeah,
And
no, it's
yeah,
a good idea.
challenging.
It's
So
you know, in the bright white of the swan and the canvasbacks,
Yeah.
obviously will really pop on the water.
Yeah.
Would he actually gun over those or? No?
I don't know. We'll see. He has been known to.
Okay.
You know, you seem it'd be like an odd combination.
Yeah.
Where I hunted my canvasbacks in Manitoba 6 years in a row, where I passed shoot my Drake cams, tundra swans were always in that area, come across that same bank.
Yeah.
So I'd see them all the time, and
Yeah.
it never really dawned on me till I'm looking at it tonight that I've seen it a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bruce,
Yeah.
I bet they were sago ponds.
Single what?
Sago pond plant. They feed
Single
on-
swans?
Sago.
No, it was
The
small
food.
groups.
No.
It was still a,
No, the pond.
The
Oh,
pond.
they were feeding
yeah,
sago plant.
there was a
That's a big
big,
plant.
bigger water on the left side and more marshy stuff on the right side.
But that's what holds them together. They both feed on that.
Yeah.
pond plant.
Yeah, it was neat to see them.
Yeah. Any other questions at all? Yep.
How do you secure the lead then in your keels? You pour epoxy into it?
I pour epoxy glue into it. I use 5-minute epoxy for that. It's not.
You don't use 5-minute for the other epoxy glues you use?
I use West System. It's a slower drying epoxy. You can buy that at Brockler. But I haven't had any issues with the 5-minute stuff either. Yeah.
Would you seal the inside of the decoys with? Hollowed out?
Yeah, I've used that epoxy
Okay.
occasionally or a varnish. So,
I've done shellac, just
Yeah.
shellacked them before.
yeah. Yep.
I don't know if that's a good idea or not. It
Well,
seems to work. But
Some people don't even seal them, so,
Okay.
yeah. Yes, sir.
When you're carving hollowing out, how do you keep that thickness
Yeah.
uniform?
Yeah, so I'll use my drill press with a Forstner bit. So, and when I cut my decoys out, you got this top profile when you cut it out. I'll save that. So when I put it in the drill press, it'll go in the drill press and it's basically flat like this. So I'll go through and I'll pencil out around the perimeter, maybe 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch around the perimeter. And then I'll kind of find my thickest spots, kind of draw that there, and say draw it here, that's where my thickest spots are. And then I'll set my drill press up where it can't go past that depth. So I'll put the bird on the side like this and run my drill press all the way down, so it's not going to go through. And then it's a lot of just kind of working your way in there. I'll do as much as I can with the Forstner bit. Then I'll go to a Fordham with a kind of a cut saw round. It's kind of an aggressive bit. You go in there and dig out a bunch more. And then I picked up these calipers.
for bolt turners.
Yes, for bolt turners. So, and I just got those for these, and it really helped me with the Swan. They're huge, they're big. So it's kind of a seat. It's kind of an hourglass or figure 8, and they pivot in the center. So when you open it up and clamp it to or close it in on something, say on the inside of that bird, on the other side it'll show you how thick you are. So I'm still a 1/2 inch there, and then I just go through and make a bunch of reference points in there and just write 1/2 inch or 1 inch. Then when I go back in with my Fordham, I know I got about a 1/2 inch to take out or 1/4 inch. So So I'll get them somewhere in the ballpark of maybe 3/8 of an inch thick or 1/4 inch. So, but the swan took a lot of time. I bet I spent a good part of a Saturday just hollowing that thing. And one night, so I bet I had close to 14 hours of just hollowing this beast. For my ducks, I'll spend like an hour, so it's a lot quicker.
Do you pour the lead in the keels, or do you add like strap or rod, or how do you do that?
I'll use lead shot.
Okay, you strap.
Yep, lead shot, and I'll get it to the weight I want. And I got a little scale. I put it on the scale, so then I write down what it weighed to where I want it, and then I dump it out, and then I pour in some epoxy glue, and then I'll take and fill that, put it on the scale and fill it up to where it needs to be, and then I'll take some 2-part of epoxy putty and fill in the top, and then when I varnish it, it kind of seals everything up. I've poured lead into keels before. I don't know if I had, when I poured it out, you only end up with maybe an 1/8 inch or less. It burns, and it ended up burning through. So that, I just don't like burning lead either. So this lead shot's been a lot easier for me.
What size shot do you use?
Yeah.
Like 8s or 7.5s or?
Not sure. I bought a big bag years ago, and I still am using it. I'm not sure. I don't know if it matters too much.
Canvas bags. 3s or 4s.
Well, that's pretty much it.
Smaller shot.
And then painting them, of course. So.
7.5 surrounds.
All the canvasbacks, all the vermiculation is done with the comb, and then painting and dry brushing and several shades, different shades of color.
Do you just like, when you're doing the texture paste, first what do you use for texture paste? Like what?
Liquitex.
Liquitex? And do you just like apply all that and go at it, or do you just do like one section and then move on to another
Good
section?
question.
Another section.
With these, so I'll always start this group of feathers here. So I'll start the ones underneath. So this group would be my first start. I'll actually, what I've been doing is I'll take a mixture of texture paste, gesso, and a raw umber paint. Just the raw umber is just a tinted, so if something gets rubbed off, it's not going to be that white gesso or white texture paste showing through. It'll be a browner shade, gray shade. So I'll apply that mixture here, and I'll comb through it, and I'll come up here, comb through it. If you actually look at this, I painted this feather on with the texture paste, combed it. Then I went and painted this one on, combed it. So I did individual feathers.
Okay.
And how I do that is I start from the top, the back, and then I work my way through here.
Just doing one feather at a time.
Individual at a time. You kind of got to work quickly, because if you're doing that feather that's in front, that stuff dries pretty quick, especially when you're doing the winter. So you need to be fairly quick, otherwise you'll end up, it starts drying on you, and it ends up kind of dragging.
And it's just a time, is it just based on time or effect that you do one feather at a time?
Just as a challenge, I think.
Okay.
Just to try to make it look as realistic as I can.
The reason I ask is every time I do comb vermiculation, it looks terrible to me until you like paint it, but I just slap it all on at once and quickly just try to fly through like a whole scapular area and then a whole
There's nothing wrong with that. I do that on a lot of birds too. With these, I just try to do a little more. So I'll do the top, let that let this dry, and I'll go on to the other bird.
And do you get that level, or do you actually have to sand them down then until like get
Yeah.
all the perfect?
When I'm done, it doesn't take much.
Yeah.
It's not far from this. I'll just lightly sand it to knock off any high edges, or if you end up with a transition area where it got a little
Sloppy.
dried a little bit on you, I'll just sand it out a little bit and works pretty good.
Do you paint dark to light? Dark first?
Light to dark.
Light to dark.
With acrylics, light to dark. I think oils you can get away with going the dark to light. But acrylics, it's tough. If you get too dark to go back to the lighter colors.